unexpected there, Sean, but it's great to see so many of you. The target is an hour, but we'll see how we get on. I have been known to speak a little bit, but it's great to see so many old friends. Thank you very much for joining us. And I think I've sort of stepped in to recover the meeting for you, so I hope you enjoyed this. I was commissioned by the London Transport Museum friends to do a talk about the DLR. When I gave them all my memorabilia came out of the loft exactly a year ago, and my wife said it's not going back up the loft. And I found a contact for the London Transport Museum, and they took it off my hands. And I had a nice chat with the guy, and then he said, "You know a lot about the Docklands Light Railway." "Do I know a lot about the Docklands Light Railway?" "Yes." And they took all my stuff, and then he said, "Would you like to give a talk about Docklands Light Railway?" And they had all my stuff. But hey, there you go. So this is so off I went on the talk, and I did give the talk, I think, last week, and I think it went down okay. So it's very much sort of about the operational and planning side. I've tried to tuck a bit of engineering in. So let's see what I say. So, oh dear, good start. So, bit of a change on the Isle of Dogs. When I started, the view from Greenwich Park was something like that, and I remember it well. And that's the view only a couple of weeks ago, and it's like that. So a big, big change. And hands up, I put my hand up and say, I helped make a difference. Do I regret it? Was it good? We shall see. So I've got a few notes, just make sure I get my dates absolutely bang on. So London Docks then started. So interesting, the West India Dock. So Poplar Depots up here. At the point I was working on these screens. No, it doesn't work very well. So Poplar Depot's up here, okay? For those who know the DLR, and that's so north up that way, and the docks are down here. And these were built 1802, the first enclosed docks in London, which is quite interesting. And many of you, some of you may recall, I used to give lectures about DLR in the 1980s, and I used to go in a lot more detail, but we've got a lot to go through. Just to tell you, 1802 they opened. The engineer William Jessup, who's a member of the same club that I am, the Institution of Civil Engineers, and he was the engineer. Nice painting. It's interesting to compare this to the first enclosed dock at Liverpool that was 1715. So that's quite interesting. I just reflect on that. We're not going to dwell why. Some people told me why, and it's worth looking that up, history. So that was the first, and then there were lots more docks constructed in London Docklands, with the London Docks, the Surrey Docks, the Royal Docks, and there's another set of docks further down at Tilbury. Okay, so I mean, quite a lot there of docks constructed. Perhaps a bit of competition. Eventually, the PLA took over. Sort of 1909, it was formed, and they brought to sort of bring stability and investment across the docks. And I'm not going to go into detail why the docks were there and the issues, but that's a key thing. Interesting, and so there was a big impact as well from the Second World War on the docks, with destruction from bombing, and so the PLA had a key role in prioritising and reconstruction, an expansion of docks. It's quite interesting, worth reading up. And it peaked in the 1960s, early 60s, apparently. I found that quite interesting. It peaked in the early 60s. I was alive. I don't remember going to see it, even though I lived in North Kent. But there we are. But it rapidly declined. It's really interesting. Really winding down in the 70s and pretty much closed by 1980s. I personally first started visiting in 1983, but there was still one or two vessels there. But one of the key reasons was containerisation. Post-war, American influence with the war, that containers came in, and PLA concentrated the container traffic at Tilbury, more space. Lots of space needed to move the containers and store the containers. So, and a rapid decline by the 1980s, pretty much closed. So, just remind myself what's next. So, some of these slides are from my original 1980s stuff. So, but I felt they were reasonable slides, and so because my very expensive slide copy, I didn't quite get them. So, there's a number of options were looked at. Interesting, again, looking up and research. Oh, just plug for my friend Jonathan Willis, who worked for the GLC on the planning, has written this pretty good book. You can find it, and it gives history of all the old railways and the new railways right up to Elizabeth Line. So it's been invaluable for me in the planning bit. So one of the interesting things is that in the 1940s, post-Blitz, that the government and London were looking at rebuilding London. So there's a report around about 1943, according to this, my research, which looked at strategic rebuilding of London and railway routes, of which there were two, I understand from that, two key tube lines that emerged from north to south. The first, of course, emerged as the Victoria line that we know from Walthamstow down to Victoria, and then sort of deviated from its sort of north-east to south-west to sort of turn down to Brixton, the Brixton extension coming a bit later. But the other one that was identified was a sort of northwest, got to get this right, northwest to southeast route, which eventually sort of looked at being what they called the Fleet line, because it generally followed the River Fleet through London. So that was quite interesting. 1969, following the construction of the Victoria line, powers were sought for this Fleet line. So the Fleet line here, coming from Baker Street, giving relief to the Bakerloo line, that's the key. 3 stages was first stage Charing Cross, then to Fenchurch Street, and then finally down to sort of New Cross, with perhaps extensions onto Lewisham, which were quite key and interesting. So, and that was supported by the GLC as well. And they got powers, started to get powers towards building the first stage to 1969 to Charing Cross. And that was being constructed when I started in London Transport in 1976. That was under construction. And I had a visit to the tunnels. That's the first time I realised that once you've been in a tube tunnel, you've been in a tube tunnel. And that was it. And I'd much rather have gone and see some cranes. But there you go. Welcome to the world of civil engineering in London Underground. So powers were achieved for that, then with options, with plans to go forward to Fenchurch Street. And of course, those who don't know where that came the Jubilee line and opened to Charing Cross, and it's there to this day. So in the early 70s, GLC were worried about the sort of development, what's going to happen to these redundant docklands. Some were being converted, so you see the St Catherine's dock. Some were being backfilled around Tobacco Dock, Wapping area. But they had these big wastelands, and they were looking at opening up docklands. So that's the first time, as I understand it, that GLC started thinking, well, perhaps we can push this other line out to docklands. And they started first talk of sort of river line. Okay, so and then the stage 1 to Charing Cross, stage 2 Fenchurch Street, stage 3 maybe 4 either going to Lewisham or over to Docklands. That was the sort of behind it. So early 70s, but the sort of Tory GLC who were in power in the 70s, early 70s, they dragged their feet a bit on terms of investment and carrying forward the construction. So the construction of Charing Cross was well in hand when I started in 76, opened in 79 or 78, 79, something like that, come to that. So they were a bit twitchy about where's the funding coming and for the next bit of extension of the river line. So the GLC, so this was the Tory GLC at the time, started looking at low capacity options for serving the Docklands area. As a famous, not that I've ever read this, Travers Morgan report that's mentioned, 73, which talks about considering low capacity options, including bus modes apparently, but it was not liked in terms of the need to change modes. So it was a key sort of red flag. We don't want to have the customer changing modes. So that's quite interesting. And quite a bit of safeguarding budget, I'm told, was made available through GLC, Department of Transport, to protect the railway down to Fenchurch Street. And that's been there, so it's lots of, right down to here actually, right where we're sitting today, there'll be protected route and foundations designed to avoid tunnels for an extension of the river, Jubilee line, right here to Fenchurch Street. And of course, all that costs money in terms of changing designs for developers and that sort of thing. So that's called safeguarding budget. But really interesting, and this is, I don't know, hands up anyone who knows about this, but there's a bit of tunnel that was built for this extension to the river line or Fleet line. And I've fairly recently found out about it within the last 20 years. And it's down here somewhere. But in terms of the fact that we had this challenging ground south of the river, there's a short length of tunnel, 180 metres, was built using a sort of, what I call it, a slurry face TBM. Apparently, LT initiated experiments with, well, experimental TBM and built a 180-metre of tunnel, and it's still there to this day and inspected. Not by me, on my to-do list. Mrs. Ebbutt needs to put that on a, yes, take it, pull down this wonderful tunnel in New Cross. Okay, so it was built apparently on the alignment, so I can only guess it was in this bit here somewhere. So, and then there was sort of potential ambition to take over the Southern Railway lines to Hazen. So that was quite interesting in terms of that. Okay, so, but then the next thing went on to what are called GLC studies. So GLC sort of taking the sort of the key role in taking this forward. GLC by now, and there's some of these funding issues were associated with GLC. I think there's a bit of sort of feather rustling going on between GLC and LT, because GLC then took over LT and were responsible for the funding, whereas we used to be directly funded by government, Department of Transport. So now we're funded through Department of Transport, GLC. So a bit of fuss about GLC saying we'll call the shots. So imagine some of the politics going on at that stage. I have faint memories of sort of criticism going on. But there was this thing called the London Rail Study, 73-74. David Bayliss was a key promoter and leader on that. I think he's recently passed away within the last 6 months, I think. So I had the pleasure of meeting Dave a few times. John Willis, who wrote this book, was one of his key support, key staff. So that's interesting. So now, and that emerged that this River Line route came to the fore from the GLC. Now it's interesting to know there's still these two options down at Woolwich area. And so it's quite interesting. And they authorised LT 78 to do some planning and works on there. Much to my amazement, it triggered my memory. And I bloody worked on some of this. I remember working with a guy called Dick Bliss, who was in the construction site, and I had to do some blinking Gantt charts, pencil and ruler in those days. All right, and to show this when I get there, and this on this, they've got that many rigs here, and that many. It was the borehole contract for that job, and I worked on it in 1978. I remember it well, and it's amazing. And the other thing for the GLC, looking at what's our priority for investment here, so everything was still saying yes, we need a tube line down to Docklands, but they also said a cheaper option is to sort of invest in the North London line at that time. So North London line in those days terminated at Broad Street with electrified trains. They electrified down to North Woolwich. I'd forgotten about that. It's just Southern Railway trains running around the top, then into Great Eastern Territory or whatever it is, and electrified to North Woolwich. And I remember I ended up in a design office, and it was a big rush to get these tender drawings out of a tunnel here. The drawings, the whole package was there to go out to tender. I remember bloody folding drawings. Who's not folded drawings? And then we were folding drawings to get this, and the whistle was blown. Job stopped. Amazing. What were we doing? Taking a job to tender, having all those tender drawings without really having got funding sorted. Job stopped. I remember it well, 78. That time, and I didn't realise I'd been working on getting that job out. I didn't do any design work on it, so there we are. But fascinating, isn't it? So, all these sort of things that were going on at the time. So there was a sort of, and it was stopped by the sort of Thatcher government that came in. So GSU was struggling with funding. It was the Thatcher government that came in 79, put the brakes on, let's think about it. Not going to go into politics about that. But when that's key thing they did, really, was establish development corporations. And we have to thank Michael Heseltine for that, who was the head of the Department of Environment. And it hurts to say, full of my politics, to say what a good thing a Tory has done, but I do think, he set up the Development Corporation in Liverpool and in London, and it led to some great things. So, but there was also, at this time, a GLC and local borough review, which you mustn't forget, and John Willis had a key role in, and tends to be brushed under the table. But the GLC were a key promoter of transport, of course, for London, and I won't have it forgotten. They really were supportive, and they looked at, again, resurrected this alternative transit systems, including busways, light rail and trams, again, were raised 1976, but again concluded that a tube line was better for the area in terms of strategic growth and attracting development. And absolutely, so it was and should be. But if you ain't got the money, we've got to look at alternatives. So what were the key drivers then to move beyond? So I said to you, the LDDC, established by Heseltine, a good man in terms of 81, he set it up for London, appointed Reg Ward as the chief executive. Interesting, Ted Hornby was the chief architect planner. He came from the GLC, not necessarily a transport man, but had great vision. There's no doubt about it, had great vision. And the LDDC were desperate for improving transport links. And they had these sort of free planning zones, not only here on the Isle of Dogs, but down in the Royal Docks, which gave the developers and funders much greater freedom to build stuff. And yes, there was a little bit of that between the local left-wing local councils. I remember it well. So, and the next miracle was that they engaged London Transport to support with that planning. And today, even the last 20, 30 years, we wouldn't go anywhere near London Transport, Neville Rail or anyone like that. What a miracle that the LDDC, Tory-run body, supported, of course, with the GLC, actually went to London Transport. We didn't have a tram planner amongst them, of course, because trams had gone since the 1950s. And there's a miracle. Reflection, they did. It's by this time, when I was playing about with tunnels under the Thames at Woolwich, they were starting to look at these options, and it was in the planning office just up the corridor at 55 Broadway from where I was working. And some of you know, I'm a bit of a nosy bugger, and I kept looking in the office and over the shoulders of some friends of mine. And Chris O'Hanlon, for those of you remember him, God rest his soul, great friend, is great supporter of the PWI, was in that section. We've all been big buddies, me and Chris. Told me the story. Never a 5-minute word with Chris though, but bless him. And I showed a lot of interest. And it was Reg Jenkins, his boss, the planning team, who developed the original options there. And David Catlin, who was a mechanical engineer from Acton, who was the engineering lead for London Transport on these options, working with the GLC. Fantastic that we were involved. And as I say, I was in the planning office. I was in the design section next to the planning office, and showed far too much interest. But there we are. But the other thing, key enabler, a couple of other key enablers to get this light railway or whatever transit system going was so not only the LDC, but lots of redundant rail corridors in that area. Busways were also being considered at this stage as well, I'm told. Okay, so let's just have a look. Another key thing at that time was Tony Ridley. Now, this time, I was beginning to be taken on board. Tony Ridley, his appointment, he was, because he promoted the Tunnelware Metro, Hong Kong Metro, great promoter about it, and now he was the managing director of railways for London Transport. I was introduced to Tony, and he wanted to keep tight. Nothing to do with the establishment engineers at London Transport. He's a civil engineer, by the way, former president of ICE, all right, and so same club that I also belong to, and others. But he was having none of it. And I remember meeting. I did get this job with the. They advertised quite a low level job for a civil engineer. They had all sorts of civil engineering contractors and consultants all lined up doing stuff, including boreholes. And someone said to them, well, perhaps we ought to have a civil engineer who knows a little bit about what they're talking. You might have an opinion on that, but I got the job. And I mean, the thing is, David Catlin, I remember this day we met Tony Ridley. Said, oh, Tony, this is our civil engineer one. Said, oh, can we afford it, David? Do we need him? Thank you very much, Tony. But there we are. But and the rest of the show's history. But he was not having any of the engineering, but he'd come from Hong Kong, and a lot of the consultants and project managers people were from Hong Kong, and a jolly good job too, because they did progress things. We'll come to that. So the other key thing was the redundant railway corridors. It's popular. Sort of where there was the North London line came down here. That's the Millwall Extension Railway built in the 1870s. I'm not going to go into dates of anything. The interesting thing is that this is the London and Blackwall Railway, and a lot of this infrastructure and corridors was all there. Needed a lot of attention, a bit of work. But this is 1840s. The first railway in North London. The first railway in London, of course, was the London and Greenwich. So quite a lot of the land was still there. And there's the sort of a full London Blackwall there, and there's the full sort of Mill Extension Row 1870s down to what we knew as Island Garden. And a lot of that infrastructure was still there. I think I've got some pictures. There we are. Limehouse Viaduct. That was a sort of listed viaduct. Gave us a bit of a challenge. Some stories about that. I remember we had a I'll come to a few stories later. But one of the key stories about this, it was a listed structure where the HMRI were really, really supportive. Can't say enough how supportive they were in developing the options here. But the width of the formation wasn't enough for a new two-track railway to current standards, 1983, okay? But we're looking at light rail, so it's a smaller kinematic envelope. I'm not going to ask you and challenge you on the benefits of it, but I'll tell you, it's smaller kinematic. So surely we can get two passing trams on there? No, we still had, and working space for day maintenance, of course, that's what we wanted to get. No, but we did have enough room. So we were planning about that. But I remember GLC rep are there, sort of, everyone's looking to cut money but get the railway. I said, this person said, well, what's the problem? Why can't the staff, when a train comes, just step over the handrail and hold on the outside? I think it was Lieutenant Colonel Rose, Colonel Townsend Rose, who was the HMRI inspector, was very, very tolerant and understanding, I think, of something. But little things like that. We were even asked, well, why do you need a depot? Can't you just stable them overnight at the stations? Don't go there, Paul. Right, okay, so really what I'm saying is a few pictures then of what the formation was like. There were these old rule-time bridges, and this has got some granite columns. Original granite columns are there. Anyone know the design code for Cornish granite columns in the 1840s? No, nor do I. But there we are. But the interesting thing is we did incorporate them in the new works, which is quite interesting. And then, of course, some old pictures of the viaduct. This is only the other day with my colleague Neil, who's helped me with some of the stories. And that bridge is not there, but these abutments and that were all there, ready for us that were used. And they say all gate possible. That was Poplar. It's All Saints Station is just the other side of that bridge. Poplar only a couple of years before we started in '83. That's the formation at Devon's Road. Yeah, so Devon's probably taken from Devon's Road. Looking that way, that's the LTNS and the District Line going across. But this is the North London Railway Bow Works or Bow Depot. There was a huge land of land that was Bow Works, Bow Depot, and it was in our powers. We had the right to purchase this land. And I remember sitting at meetings saying, come on. And they were saying, oh, the budget's a bit tight. Oh, we can squeeze a depot in at Poplar. Are we ever going to run two-car trains? Well, we might do to Beckton. Oh, someone did some sums. Oh, I think we can fit enough trains in at Poplar. I was fuming. I remember it, but, I wasn't particularly senior. And then, of course, the bean counters say, well, it cost us more money because there was a developer wanting to. But the whole of this site was available with for potential for a depot. So the one that got away, were you doing your job, Paul? Could have done better. Okay. So then they went on to looking at street systems. That's what we're looking at. We're very much talking about trams now with street running. And this is sort of Reg Jenkins' office. Chris O'Hanlon was in there. And I don't remember this so much. So this is pre-83. And they were playing about this sort of thing. This has taken over the old viaduct. Street running up Burdett Road to Mile End. And there were definitely street running options down here. But Ted Hollenby at LDDC was adamant that we had this feature across the docks. So it's very interesting, good concept. Lots of little options down here, taking over the formation. So quite interested that was being developed. And with our LT team very much in the fore, and David Catlin in this team. So let's say this before my time. I'm very interested in what emerged from that. And look, I even had a drawing of that Aldgate loop. I mean, I don't remember the Tower Hill loop. I'm a bit sceptical about that one, but I do remember that one. And I remember Chris O'Hanlon talking to me about it, and it was one that got away. I know it's probably an extra £50 million or something, but at the time we should have done it. But there we are. It was the one. Oh, of course, the interchange there, by the way, was at Aldgate East, for those who are not. But I won't dwell on that because we've got a lot to get through. So eventually, there was a scheme developed. And at this stage, the North Road went up the North London line and still a bit of street running to Mile End. And we got powers. We went initially for first batch of powers to build to Island Gardens, from Tower Gateway, Tower Hill, Minories it was called in those days. That's the first batch of powers. And then when I started, we were planning the powers, so what we're going to do up here. Okay, and of course it was Mile End when I started. So the key thing was that there was this GLC LDC LT report that said, yes, we can build a light railway for East London. And this was the conclusion of it. It was, look at this, June 1982. In October 1982, Heseltine stood up at a conference. I mean, John Willis told me a story only the other day. He said he had a session with Heseltine. I said, how on earth did you get the funding approved for the DLR so quickly? He stood up to the conference and announced that they were going to build a light railway to Docklands for £77 million, and it would open in 1987. All right, he stood up and did that, and apparently the answer to John Willis was, "I just took a punt." I said, I had to announce something. I wanted to get on with it. Well done, Michael Heseltine. So then there was the 82-83 public consultations when just after I joined, just after that, the scheme, and you'll see where we went with the scheme. So, and John Willis tells the story of the very little interest in public consultation at this stage in 1983. It just goes to show we were ahead of all the screaming problems with new railways. So, and it was parliamentary powers rather than the Transport Works Act in those days. So I'm not going to dwell on top of that, but it was following old railway corridors, and it was very much ground level from here. It came down to ground level here. It was elevated across the dock. The plans that went in had a raised roundabout there. I remember it well. And of course, we still were negotiating what we could get away with British Rail, who were fantastically supportive. It meant losing 2 tracks of the approaches to Fenchurch Street Station for over half their length. And again, some of my LT museum talk explained why. It was Sir Bob Reid, who was in charge at the time, who made the dictate, you will help London Transport with this. I mean, what fantastic vision from Bob Reid, what fantastic support from Eastern Region. But it was Eastern Region and not someone who was based in York and not someone in London. And I will say, my good friend worked tirelessly with us from British Rail Eastern Region, Des Willis, who did so much to help us get the access, possessions and deviations from standard to build the Docklands Light Railway. And God to rest his soul, he's passed. So there we are. That is the scheme in the office when I started in 1983. And it was street running to Mile End. We were looking at streetcars and we had a potential extension on to Beckton. So that's very much what we were. But at that time I started, summer of 83, an opportunity had arisen. Let's see what's the next slide. So we were looking at that sort of thing. I confess, I did travel to some of these. So this is San Diego trolley system. This is Utrecht, and that's Nantes. And they didn't send me to San Diego. I subsequently paid my own way. But these are fantastic light rail schemes, manual driven, and Utrecht, I really did. Those streetcars were maintained in the same place as the buses. So fantastic. So that was the system we were looking at. So I apologise for this drawing, this picture, but it's really to get the impression. So north is that way. So this is the North London line down to Poplar. So this is the North London line. This is what's now called the famous Bow Curve. And this really unlocked the railway that we know today with Bow Curve here. Hartfield Terrace was here. I got involved in talking to the people in terms of when we were getting our powers. So we quickly changed our powers. Network Rail, British Rail released tracks. Thank you, Bob Reid. Must have had an influence on that negotiating this. So we were going to turn left here and go down the Mile End Road. Amazingly, now we've got an independent formation taking us all the way, just a single line. There was a 2-tractor here and a single line from there all the way to Stratford. And that dictated the headway of the train of the early days train service. But amazing. That really opened it up to different types of railway. And thanks to BR for their Gressel. For those who are a bit nerdy about buses, that's Bow Bus Garage. But this was interesting here, and it means, you can see, the GLC had an experiment in the 60s about building over railway corridors, not just redundant. And this was the trial site. They put some houses over the North London line to see if they could put housing because of the land, the challenges of land, housing over railway corridors. But, oh, God, that bit us on the backside. We had to jump through all sorts of hoops. Even early days of railway sort of noise and vibration mitigation, we had to jump through hoops here to get them on side and get the parliamentary powers. Quite a few challenges with that, but I'm not going to dwell on that. Really, the interesting thing now was so the funding from Hasseltine was £77 million split between the Department of Environment through LDDC, True Blue Tories, and split 50% Department of Transport, which was through London Transport, through the GLC, who at that time were True Red, Red Kent. Okay, so very interesting meetings were had, but people were pretty cooperative. John Willis, of course, was working with GLC, and I was working with others. But I mean, for those of you who don't know your history, Ken Livingstone, bless him, I'm not going to give my personal opinion about him, but did insist on putting the number of unemployed right across the width of County Hall on the opposite side of the river to the House of Parliament where Thatcher's government was. And, if it was 3 million and 2 went up the next, or 3,200,000 or whatever, it went up, the number went up, and the huge numbers, probably about 5 in this room. Those you might, but so, yeah, they were a bit of a pain to the Tory government, and they wound up the GLC, didn't they? But I'm not going to detail it, but they wound up the GLC. Well, I'm not a sort of left-wing, true left-wing supporter or whatever. I just wanted to make sure that the GLC get their fair reflection on how supportive and promoting of this railway they were. But eventually, the Tories took out the GLC, basically, and it was then passed to London Transport as the funding and the LDDC. But it was quite clear that it was the LDDC now in the driving seat. So there's the next miracle, is that they ran with us. But just a little story about this. So I'll try to start with colour. This was sort of blue and that was red, blue. But these are some of the stations that we're talking about in the summer of '84. And it was the day of the Queen's Honours being announced, where we had a little flag waving GLC. We are part of this, and we did some trial holes, and there's lots of adverts and Docklands Light Railway is coming. And the chair of the LDC was a guy called Nigel Brokes, all right? And the GLC representative was Dave Wetzel, ex-bus conductor, Minister for Transport with the Red GLC. And I remember this day, clearly, we were there. I had to arrange it all. I had a plant there, a contractor there, and the signing, get them to agree the logo and everything. So I've gone far too much. But one of the best stories ever was, it was the day of the announcement of the National Honours, of Queen's Birthday Honours. And Nigel Brokes was knighted. Sir Nigel Brokes. Marvellous. Dave Wetzel turns up, says, "Nige, slap, well done, mate. Fantastic news." And you could see Sir Nigel Brokes. Oh, thank you very much, Dave. And he only had to wait a few days, I think, and the GLC were no more. But there we are, a little story. I can't say I particularly enjoyed it, but it was funny. Okay, so that was the swan song for the GLC, and on we went. And we ended up with a tender route for the Docklands Light Railway. And in those days, we had our engineers, we were going for an engineered design. So rather like getting to the folded drawings and sending it out, engineered design for civil engineering. Of course, I was very much involved with that, and engineered design for manual driven OLE equipment, sort of trams. And I've subsequently found out that Holney really had a thing about overhead line equipment. Didn't think it was going to be good for Docklands' image. So that's quite interesting. But the industry found out about that as well. So they knew that Docklands Light, LDC, very much now in the chair, and almost a miracle that the LT were involved. And we had the project team, and I was working with this project team. I think there were 5 people, Nichols Associates, who've done a lot for London Transport over the years. But this was their really sounding ground. Mike Nichol himself had helped Tony Ridley with the Hong Kong Metro rolling stock. And I got to know those guys very well and sort of blended in with their sort of, I think it's half a dozen of us producing these contracts, with obviously people doing the boreholes, people doing the design. So Mortals were doing the design, Arabs some architectural stuff, Kennedy and Donkin were doing the M&E specs, and we were going out for all these multiple contracts. But the next thing happened is, rail industry, they're not stupid. They knew the LDDC what they wanted. Ted Hollenby wanted this elevated thing going through on docks. They started proposing these sort of fancy automated systems, and some with OLE in these sketches. All of them, not that one. But these were the sort of bidders that would be attracted now. Automated systems. This is the French valve system. So like a Gatwick shuttle, But it was advertised, and so we were told to turn around a contract from an engineer design and an engineer supervised contract. Turn around. It was all ready to get ready to go. Summer of '84. I think we had about 6 weeks to turn it round to a new design and build, almost turnkey contract. And that was an amazing sort of feat that we had to achieve. And I'm pleased to say that we did. I was part of that. I bloody worked hard on this job. And so we had a performance spec then in terms of things that we had to do. We had our sort of engineer design stuff underlined. This is what we'd like. You can provide this if you want. And there was some stuff in there because as I was sort of growing and learning about stuff and talking to the likes of Ron Mott, who was around in the railway, and at last I had a chance to change some of the stuff going in from these Hong Kong consultants. I was sort of saying, well Ron was very helpful. But, these things were then parked underneath this performance spec and, of course, a contract. And it was a bespoke contract. I had nothing to do with that. I was on the engineering side. But things like, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but sort of like 1,500 people per hour per leg or something like that. That was but it was pure performance. And I think there's a couple of figures coming up later. But this was the performance spec for loadings. And this is a very expensive signature. And the one thing I did insist on was that we had, so the RL loading, which is the London Underground loading, for those of you, there's a sort of envelope that allows you to have different types of rolling stock, multiple cars, all right, that sort of thing. And we went for half RL. And that's something that Tyne and Wear ducked, by the way. They just went for full loading. We went for half RL, and that gave us an envelope for light rail cars and multiple working in the future. This says the loading can be reduced below half RL, subject to using the loading that accommodates the vehicles. There we are. We were going for single car units, 3 bogies, single car units. I think maximum was every 8 minutes. And everything only had to be designed for that. Anyway, and the rest is history, and I can talk about that another time. But there we are, and that is now in the LT Museum. So I had that. So I'm very pleased to say that. So eventually, after a long, hard summer, and it was literally just the summer, with bids and submissions and reviewing the engineering and reviewing the packages, I don't remember there being too much consultation. We settled on what's called the GEC Molan package. I was quite surprised. So it's a classic sort of steel wheel, steel rail package, low-level conductor rail, automated. That's what absolutely amazed me. And HMRI was very cooperative and involved. Fantastic. But it was design and build, £64 million. So at least they worked it out. Other bidders put in prices that were higher than £77 million. Bloody hell, my blinking salary has to come out of that £77 million. So give me some break, so how? So I think someone like the French system, I think they were so arrogant. Oh, you want our system? And they put a bid in near 80, I think. So there you go. But fascinating. And it was 15 stations were negotiated, only 11 trains, and 8 trains. So, and they did also done some modelling with their performance and braking and acceleration to get that to meet that X number of people per hour. So quite interesting. Oh, there it is. 1,760 passengers per hour was the capacity, and including maintenance facilities. And interestingly enough, I remember, see, people might be here to remember this, or online, but I'm no doubt about it, that when the railway was finished and completed, and they said it's ready, we had to shut the railway so that they could demonstrate they could run this 8-car train service and achieve the 1,760 passengers per hour without any passengers on the railway. So there was nothing we could do about that. We had to shut the railway for a full weekend. And so all the people said, well, what's going on? The trains are running. Well, I can't get the trains. And we had to have people at every entrance to the station saying, sorry. Okay, so what did we get? The LT project team now. So in that time, I said there's about 5 or 6 that got into tender. There was a hiatus in London Transport. The contractor was off and running. Think about this, 84 October 84, and you had to have that open by the end of 87. That's 3 years-ish. Amazing. Now I think back, and they were off and running, and I was there. Chris, I know that's Chris Allen, for those who don't know him, bless him, was great help at this transition time, and Nichols were not immediately given the contract. I think Tony Ridley must have pushed very, very hard. It took a couple of months to get them on board, by which time GC Molan were off. But anyway, even Nichols' team, the main project manager's not there, only talk at APM. These guys are from our estates department. Tony Howarth was our sort of liaison, one liaison guy going in and talking to people about kicking people out of their properties. 2 commercial guys, and this guy's a ringer because he could play cricket. Finally, Keith Ware was our one M&E person. What a contrast. I was quite young at the time. This is me, by the way. A nice white Paul. But there you go. I was sort of what we would call exec level in those days. Quite low level, because they didn't want, Tony Ridley was not keen to bring anyone in. Quite low, and I took a punt. I went across and did I enjoy that job? I don't know. But Keith was the ex-chief mechanical engineer who was struggling, and I'm sure his family won't mind me saying, but he was struggling at a high level of managing Acton Works and the problems there, union labour there. A big buddy of David Catlin, and David Catlin, who actually retired, brought Keith in. And what a way to finish your job on a techie project job. And Keith was one of the engineers on Victoria Line. And I've learned so much with Keith and great relationship. So fantastic. And I achieved similar to Keith by ending my career as an engineer rather than a bloody manager. So there we are. So that's the team. And it was the team. And that was the team that managed the GC Molan package. So the main project manager, for some reason, is not there. And there we are. So anyway, on to just a quick rattle through. What's the time? I've not got my watch ready. Sorry? 6:15. All right, we'll rattle on. I need to finish about 6:30. And I said, I'll crack on. There's quite a lot to go, but just that is where it started. Poplar, that's that bridge where there was a bit of track at the early 80s. So it is 84, the autumn of 84. It's quite nice though. I remember it being very muddy. So that was the first bit of work pioneer. That's the OMC, Poplar OMC site there. That's Tower Gateway. So it's, and there were talks about could we release platforms in that's Fenchurch Street. Could we release platforms at Fenchurch Street, like wheeling dealing going on? Could we take 2 tracks all the way to Fenchurch Street? As I say, I was very patient with some of the braced ideas that came out to try and help us do it affordable solution. So we built this new viaduct all the way from Cannon Street Road down into Tower, what eventually became Tower Gateway. It was Minories at the time. But look at the way it's squeezed in between this building. So this is this car park here, the City London, City of London owned this. So look how tight it was there. Thanks to my colleague Martin Roach, ex-civil engineer from LU, who amazingly 2 weeks ago just said, "Oh, what do you mean? You'd like some photos like this, Paul?" And I think I'm over here. So there we are. But so you can see it squeezed in, and we had to pay enabling works to sort of pull the gantries back there. So that's that. Then there's a sort of before and after at Limehouse. This clearing of vegetation was part of that last Garth GLC works, which meant we could do some surveying. So that was sort of what was, you see the throat there. BR had taken the 2 track in there, and the junction to Fenchurch Street was a bit beyond. But there was an approach made to say, can you slew back over, tighten the curve up again? No. I kept saying, no, don't go there. But they wouldn't listen to me. But then, so we then had to build a new alignment, those who know the area. And you can see it going on the refurbishment works of the viaduct, of the old viaduct. There's a little story about refurbishing the viaduct. So this is a brand new bridge, but they took the old girder. I'm amazed that I got away with this, and said, could we keep the girders? And they were the old girders. All the bridges up between Limehouse and West India Quay here were the old bridges. The old girders were retained, cleaned, painted, but not structural. And behind that is precast concrete structures that took the load. So a nice finish on that. It was a listed viaduct, and so lots of treatment done to the parapets as well. Nice job done. But we had to get in all these arches, and this was the saloon bar of Charlie Brown's was at the back of this here, and he was a proud landlord. And my job was to go and explain to people, well, we need access. And I says, some people let you play ball, some people didn't. We had to serve pals. This guy, I can't remember, Joe, that was his name, Joe. He said, oh, yeah, come in. But we had to go and negotiate. So first time, I remember went down about midday-ish. Negotiate, have a pint of my beer. Well, I was busy. Well, you don't want to try my beer? Oh, well, yeah, okay, Joe. Joe, God, have another. And we get in there, make progress. I don't know what I did after that. In those days, pubs used to close at 3 o'clock. Thank God. And I remember it. So next time I said, well, let's make the meeting 2:30. We went down, got down, have a pint of my beer. Oh, yes, Joe. Yeah, we loved it last night. Pint of beer. And then, 3 o'clock, I thought, I said, boom, bolts go up and down. Okay, bring it. Anyway, we did negotiate access to do the archworks. We did negotiate. There was a toilet, a pub the other side of the arches, protected, covered way and all that. And they did do the strengthening. And it was true. The criminal thing about this, for those who know the area, is that that's no longer there. Yeah, and the bar was the shape of the Isle of Dogs. Anyone remember that? No, don't remember that. It was the shape of the Isle of Dogs. And if anything should be listed, that area there was. But that is now where the Docklands Relief Road goes through. I've got an opinion about that, but we won't do it. But there's a nice little story, and I've lots of other stories, of course. So there we are, construction across the docks. This is Canary Wharf. That's another picture of that in a minute. And this was going to be a big roundabout here, with 3 stops on it, apparently. So the train came in and it went round this roundabout, off there. And the Powers, I couldn't find the drawings of the original Powers. The Powers had, I remember seeing the roundabout drawn on the scheme drawings. There were a Poplar Depot, of course, over there, and the Delta Junction, as we called it, was in those areas. So, and this is just before I started in 1983, this is the strip of, it was completely clear, Wharf, and that's where the short takeoff and landing aeroplane landed, which gave the concept for the city airport. And just an aside on that, I have to talk about the DLR many years ago. And one of the questions I was always asked was, why are you not going to serve the city airport? And I constantly tripped off this sort of corporate message about, oh, no, not enough demand. So there we are, the rest is history on that one. So I told a few lies. There we are, future construction. So these are the main docks. You can see the way. And look at it. They didn't even take the old building down. It's fascinating, isn't it? The contract was so tight. They just literally cut that slot road, the contractor, and we had to deal with that. That's all we tendered for. So that's all we do. Tom, remember some of the stories there. But this was a fabricated steel structure. Good, economic design with a slab, a sort of composite slab, reinforced concrete slab. Got issues about that. And again, it was quite a good, efficient design, steel and concrete structure. Anyone know what this is? This is no longer there. This is why I've got these lovely snippets of the old railway, the original railway. No, this is Mudchute Viaduct that was there. This is the largest size rolled section you could get in the UK at the time. And it was so beautifully economically designed, so not fabricated. Not very detail about that. Cross bracing, slab on top. These columns, remarkably similar size to the columns that Molan were building at the Sidcup bypass at the time. I used to live in the Sidcup area, and they're remarkable. So reuse of shutters, and God, there's plenty of these columns around. No protection on the columns, no drainage provision. It was just complete showers down onto the. We had people parking their cars underneath complaining, "Hey, I'm putting shelter up." We go to Molan and said, "Well, there's nothing in your spec about drain," and they created what we call a Chinese hat. The drain came down and just sprinkled water underneath them. Fair cop. We didn't put it in the no detail spec. Performance spec did not say thou shalt not wet neighbours' cars. There we are. So slab track on top. I'm not going to do too much about it, but we'll come and look at that in a bit. But that was been no Conrails coming in there. There were issues around reinforcement of that and stray currents. All I would say to you is that's a dark art. Not my bag, but I didn't learn a lot. The interesting thing is City Extension, which is, if you wish me to talk about it, I can give a separate talk on, and Canary Wharf, had a completely different approach to that was adopted on this railway. So there we are. Right, so Island Gardens then, which is now closed, was a quaint little single car railway which was a Y shape, looked very nice from above, and but not many people see it except from the helicopter. But there we are. But it was only single car. That was where that Millwall Extension Railway terminated. We cleared the site, bought this fancy Y-shaped station, and I'll talk another time about the implications that had for multiple car working. And during construction, there had some challenges. And one day, and we used to have an on-call person who would be, of course, the contractor, they're on call, but we as client are on call. And one day, I don't know if it was me who was woken up, this happened. Some of you will remember that, but and there was a fixed, well, wasn't really a fixed bus stop, was it? It was a moving bus stop, which I'm told flew across the road. Health and safety near here or what? And I remember, and what they were doing there was an aggressive test. Yeah, it's pretty aggressive. It's called an aggressive test. I just thought, why would you do an aggressive test there? But there you go. So we had a few challenges, and that of course got in the press. But there's another one. This is the last train that ran on the North London line between the junction right up near Stratford. Not actually Stratford. What is it? It's where the
Victoria Park.
Thank you very much, John. Victoria Park Junction and Poplar. This is the very last train that ran, and we did this for that Holyhead Close sort of 1960s GL boom to demonstrate to them that a train was not going to create too much noise. We had measurements, specialists, and all set out. We've got the wheel turns down the depot somewhere, East London, all ready and done. But of course, this had been a footpath since the 1960s or 70s. People were going up and down. I remember that. I think I probably took that photo, and I was up there, and we were all there in our yellow vests. None of this sort of yellow underpants and that sort of thing in those days, just yellow vests. And we I was out there, and I was down that way, and these joggers just sort of jog past. So, well, where's the train going? Upon the other one, and then he turned around and he came straight out as the train came out. But unfortunately, the train had to put emergency brakes on, so we had to do the noise test with a set of flats. Now, there we are, nice little story. There we are. So there's that area in construction, just to show a bit of, and there's the old Bow Works again over there. Just show just the before and afters, not many before and afters. I'll talk a little bit about that. So track laying on the ballasted track on areas where ballasted track on Limehouse Viaduct was there this day. A ballasted track, of course, up the cutting. Amazing. It was new ballasted track for the whole length of that. Interesting, but this actually didn't work, and they ended up doing it by hand and dragging the rails off a flatbed. I think they used this train, but they had a sort of fork. Was a faultless in again? I don't know. 1986. Yeah, probably start using them, but they eventually abandoned this stuff. I think they got it second hand from a preserved railway anyway. So there we are. But they did lay it eventually. Lots of thermic welds as it was, and no long welded rails. So there we are. And then of course up to Stratford, where we took over the BR tracks. So we took over the BR tracks there. I mean, amazing. An ATO railway, automatic train operation railway, could run next to, and this was still to have day maintenance on the main line over here. Amazing, thanks to the HMRI, fantastic. And these are the leaning posts. I remember, and the idea was, and this was our mitigation, to keep away from the shoe gear here and the passing trains there. If there's one on, and you're on the main line side. So the thing about the Docklands Light Railway ATO, no day access or maintenance. So that's fine. That's how it got accepted. That's how Ted Allenby got his low-level Conrail system that I've shown you, and amazing. And so the idea here was that you went on, and you just sort of either stood next to them or lined yourself up between the posts, and you were safe. Interesting. Well, obviously I wasn't out there when the ATO was running because we didn't have to do that. But I think there's a fence there now. From what I've been down there, and it's interesting. I don't know why we didn't put a fence up in the first place, but there we are. So another couple of things. So this is some of the tortuous curvature down at South Quay. That's South Quay Station. I'm just deliberately showing things that are not there anymore. South Quay no longer in that location. And I'll come to another Ebbutt story in a minute. But the powers gave us the full width. The road goes under here. We had the full width and a bit of corridor either side of the road to give us the choice of alignment. This is actually not this post-opening, but prior to construction, there was a building here, which was a Naffold factory that they talked about converting into sort of low-rise development. and the developer was clearly asking for too much. And so we diverted the railway here. No sooner had the columns come out of the ground on the Docklands Light Railway, and the great developers started buying developers and this sort of thing, and that building was knocked down. And again, I'd said to people, well, couldn't we just push that alignment up there and just do one sweeping turn down onto Cross Harbour? We had the powers, but there was not the appetite. Great shame. Sorry, guys. I tried to eliminate some of your wear problems in that curve, but there we are. And of course, this is the typical detail arrangement, which was it was a cast slab with holding a crude jack and brace system holding the tractor line, and then some cast. There was a rail pan underneath this, and a cast resin type block system there. And I think some of these were a bit thick where they were low and here, and I think that's given some issues with long bolts which aren't anchored. So, just one of the issues that might have emerged. E-clips was a standard, and what I forgot to say is an 80-pound rail was used for new build, and I was very disappointed about that. But that led to other issues which we'll come to. So another beautiful picture. You can see the way the Conrail now is supported on the slab tracks, and you've got these wonderful expansion switches, which I remember were and still are, I gather, a bit of a maintenance liability. Well, they're a challenge. Let's put it that way. Maintenance challenge. I think they work well in terms of transferring the wheel load across the joint, and that I believe they do work well. And so whether you've had switch tips problems, I don't know. They're done generally in a trailing mode. No, that's in a leading facing mode because I know what platform I was on when I took that. So anyway, there we are. We can, if someone wants to chip in later, they can about performance. I'm sure I spoke to Tom about those before, but you haven't ripped them all out yet. So there we are. And of course, some of the geometry on S&C was interesting. These are, got to get this right, 40-metre radius curves on the Delta. So with some challenging fabricated, they're semi-welded crossings, I think, when they first went in. Interesting. I now know that they're cast crossings. And we had these two swing nose crossings, German Krupp design. Quite a nice design where they sort of slid at the nose. And I was very impressed with the performance of those. CV 9¼ did I get it right? Yeah, no, they're quite. I was very, very impressed with how they performed personally. Can someone say you have to maintain them, Paul? Well, I think they work reasonably well compared to other experiments with swing noses later on, which we're not going to talk about today. So I was impressed by that. I was impressed they were in. We didn't specifically ask for them in the performance spec. Yes, I'd say to you that's a success for the neighbours that they were put in. So there. So then there was the cars, and I'm not a train spotter too much. Some of you might contest that, but I need to look up some statistics. So they're built by Linke Hoffmann Busch in Salzgitter, Germany. I didn't get to go out there to see these. I was on civils and stations work. Articulated cars, so 3 bogies. That big picture window, I remember. That was quite interesting, with quite an incline on it. 28 metres long, capacity of 84 seats, 210 normal, and 250 crust loading. We did test that quite a lot in the first 6 months to a year, and we'll come to that. Okay, so the other thing next is, of course, that it introduces Conrail. I said to you, I was amazed. I didn't bring a section with. I have a length of this. I use as a paperweight at home. I think, am I right? All the original Conrail's gone now? Or is there some in depots?
In Beckton still. Yeah.
Some down at Beckton. So that's quite small, composite aluminium stainless steel. Not without its problems after I left, so I hear. But interesting because Bracknell Willis did the design and the coordinated installation of that. So and we had track and our maintenance guys sharing the Conrail and the track work at the time. I think I recall that. And of course, it was shoe gear that came up underneath. With a sprung shoe gear underneath. So, and this was the winter of 87, January 88, when there was a huge dump of snow over London. This was the only railway that was running, I recall, for a period. Okay, so 750 volt DC. Yeah, I've talked about the rest. So a little bit about the control system. Yeah, okay, some of you can say, oh yeah, let's see Paul do this. But basically, there was what they call data docking link in the car, and there was a data docking link in what we call the forefoot. Going to get techie, all right? And they were really robust plywood boxes coated. Hopefully it was in yacht varnish, but as it happens, they didn't have to last that long because they did resignaling, didn't they? But that was the point. There was a sensor on the car, and it had to stop on these DDLs, which is about a length of 3 seats, I would say. Am I about right? Something like that. And so you had to get your car. Wheel rail, of course, was critical for stopping in this. So there was a speed monitor. So sometimes the trains would go a bit fast. You got automatic stopping. That sort of speed monitor. Safety tone. I think that linked to signalling to make sure that you didn't overlaps and that sort of thing. So there's signalling controls in there. Automatic train operation, the docking points, safety tone, speed monitor. But there was also a thing, and all linked to traction package in that. But all had on top of this was a regulated package and computer in the control center. So it's quite interesting. And I'll come back to that. And then there was the thing called the wiggly wire, which was a cable, and it was at track level. It ran along one of the running rails, and where they crossed was a sort of indicator to the train. And the further apart those crossing points were, the faster it went, I think, and the closer those crossing points were, the slower it went. So I was very impressed. I remembered this. So that's the principle, and that's not the wiggly wire that you currently see on the system, which is also on the Jubilee line, linked to what sort of signal is it? Something block, non-blocks. What do they call it? Moving block. So this was, and there were lots of block joints, I recall. Is that right? So we welded all these bits of 80-pound rail up, and then there were block joints. So, hopefully they were factory made insulated block joints, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I saw something. Right, so that was just an overview, but lots of wires about, lots of bits, but it was flat on the formation or on the sleepers, and so it wasn't too much of a trip hazard. Right, okay, so eventually we did manage to open the railway. Fantastic, and I was there, a good little railway, and it was a DLR pump. The rail opening, we were running slightly late, just like the original Bakerloo line, I believe, which was a little bit late. But the DLR opening was on an August bank holiday. Never open a railway and advertise it on a bank holiday or a blinking weekend. Never do that. I have never worked so hard in my life. I was on that day, 5 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember what time I went home. No wonder that marriage didn't last. So there we are. There's a summary of the costs. It's £64 million, I believe. That included my salary. No wonder I've got a good pension.
The orange bit.
This bit.
Yellow bit.
So just a few pictures of it open. So absolute minimum UK width platform, 6 foot, not even 2 meters. HMRI were very, very helpful. Yes, it did lead to some issues. There's that awful entrance at Tower Gateway. I guess it hasn't changed much now. But you'll see some of the original signing in this, some of the original cars, which is why I've thrown it in. And I'll show. There's the original track form. From no room for leaning posts between Shadwell and Limehouse. Well, in fact, Cannon Street Road and Limehouse, where we literally took over the old track, £110 rail, I think, on old pre-stressed sleepers. Any still there to this day?
Sleepers are still there.
Sleep, fantastic. And I remember taking that over, and we had a sort of running issue, which we talked about. We had this sort of low-level board. And the whole idea of this is and we had to pay for an automatic warning system for this is the LTNS lines. Right, we had to pay for an automatic warning. But some day maintained person for the LTNS was trapped here. They could lie down and roll against the board. That was in the HMRI. Were keen to that, so they missed. So our shoe gear missed. We could continue in ATO. Oh, amazing! But it was okay. I don't think it was ever an incident. So just cracking on. Then OMC was the centre of everything going on, and 2 operatives were in there to start with. But you'll see that wasn't so clever. Docks Crossing. This is Millwall Viaduct down here near Millwall Docks, and this is where current South Quay was. And I remember sitting in a meeting saying, "Shall we move South Quay to the Millwall Cut so that we can entrance and exit either side?" But there we are. Too many stories. There we are. That's the finished station that came with the job. To compare, the lifts. That's an extravagance, clad in engineering brick. But there you go. I don't know, we must have paid for that. Open steps, I remember. So if you suffered from vertigo, it was a bit of a problem. But there we are. Oh, sorry. So a couple of views of Millwall's Mudchute Viaduct, which was not used anymore. That's why I show that it was used quite nicely. But a little indicator here. So the train describer didn't always work. So, you know, so the LT Museum people were very interested by that. So there's this sort of Toblerone thing that we hung down there. It worked. And the train captains, as we called them, they're very flexible. Island Gardens, there's the station that was built. It's been demolished since. That's where the train shot off and the buffer flew off. So, yeah, and I think a nice job of the cutting stations all the way up to Devon's Road. You know, simple, straightforward stations, very little cover. And finally to Stratford. It's interesting to see, and because we just had that single line from Bowchurch all the way up to Stratford, and it was that run in and run out that dictated the 8-minute headway. So 4 minutes, well, 3 and something minutes up there, 3 and some minutes back. So if you had a problem loading the cars here, and they did used to queue it on there, didn't they? And that's the equipment room. So if we had an aggressive test here, it would have gone through there. Where's the lift? I hear you say, thought this was step-free railway. We did achieve a lift. That was my personal project post-opening. We opened a lift right at the other end of the station. That was a challenge, but we did. And eventually achieved step-free. Oh dear, we had their issues with ticketing. I'm not going to dwell on that today, but there's a good-looking young man. What do you do? I remember when the track was laid, and loads of work to do. It's always finished like that, isn't it? You know, the track's laid. The project managers are not familiar with it. I said, "Oh, Paul, we need someone to coordinate the ticketing, so you can be the project manager ticketing." So all of a sudden, I was a ticketing expert. But I can tell you, coordinating ticket machines with comms, building works, is ain't as easy as it thinks. Stick with track, guys and girls. Okay, so, but the main thing about it was, oh, I've gone on too far, I think. Oh, no, there was another, I took it out. That's right. Sorry, I took it out for you. But these things here are validators. And we tried this sort of carnet ticket thing when it first started. Not a lot of people know this. And strangely, the British public didn't just got these tickets and constantly kept reusing them. So we got rid of the ticket validators and to follow the rest of the UK. Right, so I'm nearly there, if that's all right. But just some of the things that happened. So initial reliability was an issue, of course. What do you expect? You're commissioning a railway in quite a nice summer, 1984, and we opened it on an August bank holiday, I think, you know, and we had this wheel rail performance issue, 80-pound rail and wheel profile. It got to a point where we had, especially when September morning that Dewey thing came through, and they started sliding up past those varnished boxes in the forefoot. What's going on here? Then they realised they hadn't got the right wheel profile for the rail profile. It ran very nicely at that time between Shadwell and Limehouse, I think. I recall it did run nicely because the profile was for the 110. But once you'd got the 80-pound, and that explained one of the issues. 80 railway wheel rail profile is essential. But there we are. I'm glad you know that now, Paul. Noise, of course, I've talked about with steel, and that's to this day. Train bunching regulation, unfortunately, it was a simple regulation system. And I remember early days, so we had 8 trains in service. And in those days, you stand up, I used to get trained from West India Quay up to Tower Gateway. You stand on West India Quay Station, and you could see all the way across harbour. You could see both tracks to cross harbour. And if you didn't see the train, you went and got the number 13 bus. Because by the time the trains, if there was a perturbation, there was no way of automatically resetting the trains to get this 8-minute headway. The trains just expected to get the service from 05 in the morning to 01 in the morning, and it had been prescribed. And if they were out of it, 8 trains just went round as a bunch, and at highest performance. So that was a fairly early change. Folding train doors, you know, talk about mind the gap, mind the doors. There's the door in here, and you literally did get caught in the doors. If you stood on the stand back, so no, this is the door entrance, and you expect the door slide there. The door would slap and trap your arm here. And so that was a problem. But, you know, it's a big design and build, cheap doors, ticket machines. Ticket machines I talked about. Lift performance was a blinking problem. There weren't high-spec lifts that they provide us on this D&B. And if you get in a lift and you want to go down, you press the bottom button, don't you? Well, the bottom button was the alarm. And for that complete crisis for the first month of operation. We're in that control room with 2 people. We had to get people in there. And soon, just a sort of sticker on there that said "up platform alarm" was a simple one for that. But there you go. Gapping in manual mode. Single cars was an issue. On the Delta junction, you might see a G sign. That was needed for manual operation. And of course, we needed to go into manual operation because the wheel rail performance in September mornings. So I think it comes out track component issues, which we can talk about later. But one thing I'm going to promote is it's a flexible local staff. You know, we had staff that mixed and matched a bit. Engineering had got involved in some ops stuff, I believe, at that time. It's certainly mixing, signals, working with track, working with power supplies and everything. So very nearly there. Some of the enhancements, signal power supply resilience. Another little story, but it's interesting. One day the railway came to a grinding halt because the copy machine broke down, or the vending machine in Poplar Depot, because it was on the same fuse system as the signalling system. No one asked for a UPS on the signalling system. No, that was my first job after opening, to get a UPS in. Lift labeling, talked about control room. We had a sort of tech role in there and a personal message role in there. Then weather control, we talked about that. So the first trains then went and did a sweep in manual. So to do that, and it also helped with getting the train captain's manual experience. Gates and mirrors. They're surprised once you got manual. Why didn't we have gates on an ATO railway? But that's that rush contract. And removal of those ticket validators. 2 last things: noise levels from the track viaducts. There's an alternative assembly was put in. I think this is in the Cable Street area. That's probably gone now already, has it? I don't know. And tram gateway congestion. This is really doing so, but to show you the sort of 6-foot platform, people were queuing, people getting on and off, and they were busy on trains, especially if you've got 8 trains going around together. First one was pretty busy. So there we are. Then after that came the Docklands extension to the city, mainly Canary Wharf. I'm not going to talk about that. If you wish to know more about that, I've got similar stories, and that's for another day, and I'm going to work on that. So the question is, do we like that, or do we like that? What do I prefer? What do I think? I'm quite proud of that, really, personally. I used to live in the sort of Dartford Swanley area, and I could stand. You could stand or drive up the A20 in the Swanley area, and I could see that Canary Wharf. Initially, they just built that first tower, didn't they? And I could see that, and I was thinking, I helped that. I suggest to you that those 8 people on the London Transport team were helped that, and of course, Heseltine, Ted Hollenby, and a few others. So there we are. There's an interesting picture. Thanks for your attention. Any questions? I'll probably be over time, but I hope you enjoyed it, everybody. Questions or observations?
Right, John? Yeah, thinking about your bridge specification.
The loading.
11 trains in the fleet, 8 in use, 2 car or single unit. What about the fatigue? Now you're running over everything that's going on now.
Yeah, well, I say it was the fatigue issue. So the RL loading envelope allowed us to, for multiple trains and a number of axle passes, but they just abandoned that and said, we've designed it for that. And it was the fatigue, which meant that the steel sections that they provided, particularly on the docks crossing, were at their limit for the number of passes for 100 years or whatever at that service. And that was one of the things that needed attending in my next lecture, if you want to have me.
Because it's 100 years at that loading.
I think it was about
6 months.
3 years or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and it's beyond concept from what you started with the loadings on the structures now.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we did think we might get 2-car trains to Beckton, and there was some passive provision made for platform extensions to 2-car between Stepney East and at Stepney East and West Ferry. and at Poplar actually. But Poplar was completely different now from then because it was only a 3-track railway when we built it there. So, well, I don't know.
On the West Route, was it the original ballast? Was it that the small chip?
No, we didn't read ballast, thank you.
You didn't read ballast.
I've forgotten my story about the ballasting.
Yeah, excellent.
Other people have heard it, but yeah, we didn't get the spec right for the ballast, did we?
So it was new ballast.
On the route up north, the old North London, but it was original BR.
BR, yeah.
Couldn't have been that bad, but in terms of, I don't know whether it was a limestone ballast, was it, or was it a? Was it
a small base? If you go,
but no,
if you look in Fenchurch Street, it's still got it up there.
On the Fenchurch Street bit. But yeah, Tom's alluding to the fact that I remember the spec. I remember the deliveries. So once they got rid of that, they basically stripped out the formation and then brought these lorries of ballast in. I say prepared the formation, and the lorries came from the north, and it was a very uniform, quite a small ballast and elongated, wasn't it? And I questioned it with the self-assuring part of the GEC modem thing, and it was actually the inspect, Paul. And I, you know, did I let the side down? Sorry, I didn't go through it. I probably scanned all the documents and said, you know, you're employing these consultants to provide that underlying engineering spec. And you know, I said to you, so we had these underlying engineering specs, we had a performance spec, and they picked and mixed, and they took our underlying engineering spec and delivered to it. And then threw it back at us when I said it's not, you know, design and build, that's not performing. And they said, well, we used your underlying engineering spec, it's there for information. Very frustrating. And, you know, pre-handover, if I was in a meeting, you know, I might made comment about something. I probably said something about the ballast then. And they said, is that a variation then? Everything was, is that a variation? And I was told quite clearly by our commercial guys, you're not allowed to say anything about variation. And that carried on too when those stupid swing noses came in. Original swing noses for Canary Wharf, subject of my next talk, if you wish to have me back. You know, I just said, yeah, are you serious with those swing nose crosses, with that geometry? Even I could see that wasn't going to work. But, you know, but the thing about it is the ballast came in these trucks from the north. But the trucks went back up north full of seed. So the haulage company got a nice deal. And so the following summer, it was grass coming up. Not a lot. And the irony of that is David Catlin, bless him, who was a great boss, was very keen on the light rail and tram stuff. And we were looking at some of these systems in Europe. And some of them had carpets of grass to keep the noise down. And David Catlin was very keen on having grass formation. And the irony is that we did nearly end up. Sorry, guys. God, manage that. There we are.
What were the problems with the slab track fastenings then?
Oh, well,
You alluded to some
on the
problems
40
with-
metre radius curves, we got the vibration, you know, the noise and vibration, set up some resonance with the Eclipse system. And there was no check rail then either. That's interesting. You know, so it's interesting we talk about performance issues now. There was no check rail then. They got 6-inch of cant on there, so I don't know what cant efficiency was like. I can't, you know, I wasn't so much into design then. Were you ever into design, Paul? I think you're going to say, but the Eclipse were starting to fail. Pandrel were very supportive, came down straight away, and GC Molan, of course, accepting responsibility for the design and build, came down. And the simple solution was PR clips.
Right.
And they still use this day, don't they?
Yeah. But it was on the tight curves. It was
all the tight curves, wasn't it? Yeah, and there were other issues, but that was the main one. Noise and vibration. I don't know if you've ever resolved that.
I mean, the original slab track base plates, grout pads. We don't touch them. I mean, you know, they are. You know,
solid.
how many years later? Yeah.
The thing is, when you had thick grout pads,
Yeah.
you had less embedded
Hold it down,
gout, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you ended up with some fatigue on those, I hear, I believe.
No, that was only on the Easter extension.
What's it?
A lot of the original South.
There we are. Anyway, ponding. It wasn't a sort of slip form thing. It was crude sort of. I've got to be careful. I don't sort of obviously Irish, but it was the labour force sort of pouring it, floating it. And sorry for that. Irish labour in those days, and you know, and it was floated and plus minus an inch, you're lucky. We did end up ponding on it, and of course we did have nighttime workers, and we had issues with sort of maintenance of the forefoot, and then talk about could we have walkways, and the walkways were even worse, weren't they? Oh, and we had troughing. We had a trial troughing. GRC troughing was sold to us as a cheap solution. It just fell apart after the 12 months warranty. I was fuming. And there we are.
Yep. Quick one. You showed a little pie chart with the costings at the end. Was that delivered on budgets?
Yes.
Estimates?
So, yes, it was. The amazing thing is, I mean, it is remarkable that the job was finished on programme. Well, we were 1 month late in terms of our declared programme for Buckingham Palace and the government. Someone made us say, oh, why would you invite a queen on to open it? But there you go. So, and we were 1 month late, and we were open to, I mean, as I understand it, Hasselhoff said it would open in 1987. And that was a big enough challenge, 3 years, wasn't it? 3 years. He stood up at the October conference in 82, 4 years. No, 82, so that's 5 years to get that done in terms of planning. He stood at 82, and it was only just a concept, a report, and we had to open it. I guess he was looking for October 87. Well, we did achieve that. And the budget, it was really, really strict on £77 million. And as I said, you know, slight, and I've got my issues about D&B and design and build, and we had to spend a lot of money on the DLR afterwards, which is taken really part of course. But we got the bloody thing open, you know, and it wasn't just for, and look what it did for UK PLC in terms of income from developers. I feel quite strong, but I'm really, really strong about it. It wasn't just the developers. I took out a picture of Devon's Road, actually, because I thought it'd be running out. But I remember going to Devon's Road and faffing about and problems there, some teething problem there. And there was a guy in a wheelchair there with his care or whatever, and we were working, doing something. He said, "Wow, this railway is bloody marvellous," he said. "Fantastic." Oh, really? He said, "I've been stuck in this wheelchair and in Devon's Road most of my life. You helped my life." And I say to you that more important purpose. We opened up that sort of area, social housing area in there, to get to Stratford Shopping Centre. And I felt really good about that. That made me feel good.
When you ride on it today, it's quite lively. It's quite a lively ride at the Is that designed in from day one? Is that
That's interesting, Phil, because I mean, I've got a theory about that. We had to change when we first opened it. It had this wrong wheel rail profile, and you know, I think it's quite lively between Limehouse. I'm looking at Tom there, maintained it, but from Limehouse to Shadwell sort of Cannon Street Road, it's quite lively now, isn't it? I'm sure that rode better before because it had the sort of one. I think it had the 110 or 113 wheel profile on those original cars. Now, if you've got a railway, 11 cars or 15 kilometres of track, double track, you know, it was cheapest for us to turn, or GC Molan, to turn all the wheels. They had to do that to get that performance day, that performance weekend. And so I think it was, now it's quite lively between Limehouse.
Depends on the vehicle. Depends on the vehicle.
Yeah, as well. Okay. And so the wear of the tyres, I guess. But I think it's more lively now that between Stepney, well, sort of Limehouse and Cannon Street Road, I think. And I think that with the turning of the wheels and the 80-pound rail, I think made it better.
Still not got it right.
Just to add to that would be that there were some studies done. I think there's a lot of hunting because of the tight curves and everything else. You've got a soft suspension.
Yeah.
So that works on.
Was that with the
wear.
original P stock?
No, I think it's so I'm not too sure about this one, but the subsequent.
So
the
the
one
original P stock.
Yes, I'm not sure, but because of the soft suspension, you get some benefits from the curvature and everything else. but then you lose that, yeah, but you lose out when you go on a straight, fast and straight.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit of movement. So the design, yes, the hunting.
The whole thing though along that stretch, the new viaduct along by Royal Mint Street is very, very lively. If you think about it, you've got these big girders. There's only two supporting the track, one each side, and then there's four balls, one at each corner. The bearings.
Yeah, well, a bit of bracing underneath.
It was a bit,
not,
yeah.
not huge.
No,
Really, it wasn't girder cross bracing, was it?
And,
Don't go there.
well, I actually been out there with trains running. Jeff Mitchell and Bill Capps got myself and David Bateman out there when they were having problems at Mint Street, so we could actually experience the vibrations. So that was an interesting exercise with those two working as between trains. To get,
Jeff Mitchell.
yeah. And Bill Capps, who was the track engineer at the time, and we got out there, and you were watching the trains come towards you, and the people in the front looked like it was a formation dance team. Yeah, but so those bridges, you've got and I know there was a lot of work done on the structure stability of it. They're fine from ultimate limit state. Well, I'm not sure people have looked at serviceability and the deflection.
Interesting.
Because that was one of the things we were saying, because we say, well, it can't do the point operating equipment much good to be shaking.
Well, that's another thing, yeah. But the interesting thing is, it's really very much designed to the bone, in particular with that sort of clause that you could see on the Atkins, where the designers very much told what they're to do by Molam. So yes, and there's more about managing the speed around the curves and on the gradients. But I was going to talk about that in a subsequent lecture, as I say, if you have me, because the gradients get much steeper with the city extension, and then the problems start to emerge in terms of curvature and corrugation, things like that. But that's for another day.
Any other questions? I found it curious that we still haven't got to Thamesmead, even though we were talking about it in the 70s.
Yes, isn't that? And that's shocking, actually.
Yeah.
It's a big social housing area, isn't it? So the GLC, I'm not sure lefty and all that, but no, it's fine. They should. Well, they're doing well to try and
Crickles and red flag. It was certainly the regeneration of all routes was certainly part of it.
I'll just say one thing about this, whoever's going to say thank you, but I mean, that is quite a rare piece. That is a painting by Corneo, and I happen to have a print of it.
Where's the mouse?
And there we are. Who can see the
mouse?
The mouse.
Oh, I know what a mouse is.
Go on.
But what's the? Come on, this is an automated railway. There's no one in manual operation on that.
Yeah,
So
trackside,
what's the problem?
Guy trackside, he hasn't got 18.
Yeah, there's a guy track. So honestly, who allowed that? Well, me.
We've got a high by though.
The mouse is here. Yeah. Right.
We will take you up on the offer of another presentation. Yeah, don't you worry.
Well, the LT Museum are asking for it, so we've got something to do.
Mike, will you give the floor to thanks, please?
Right, Paul, thank you very much for that eclectic gallop through the through the planning and construction of the original Docklands Light Railway, which has now grown to be something, in my view, that's an enormous success for East London. You mentioned a couple of times the famous original budget of 77 million, and I recall that the Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher, was quoted in the press as saying 77 million and not a penny more.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was it. You were going to have the railway for 77 million pounds. 77 million pounds and a penny, no railway. So the budget was extremely strict. In terms of planning it, fascinating to see all the route options that were looked at. Just to go back to the fleet line as it was,
yes,
I've seen some of the drawings for the fleet line, and as the arrow points eastwards, it says "and on to Thamesmead."
Yeah.
So there was the intention of building a tube railway to Thamesmead at one time. But enough of that. Back to Docklands Light Railway. You mentioned also about perhaps a missed opportunity for the depot.
Oh.
So I remember many years ago, a very wise old civil engineer telling me that if you are building a new railway or planning the extension of an existing railway, if you can't identify a place for the depot for staving your stock, then you cannot have that railway. And it was as simple as that. Yeah. I got involved in similar issues. Construction of Jubilee Line extension. I had 3 very fun years on that. So some of the stuff you talk about, I recognise that. And I was on the parliamentary build team for the Crossrail projects. So planning all those routes and where we're going to go around here, and oh Lord, where we didn't go is nobody's business. So fascinating stuff. Thank you very much. Would you all join me in a round of applause to thank Paul?
Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of things before we finish up. The next meeting is the 14th of May. I'll be talking trams, London trams or Croydon trams, given by the Asset Trams chap called Omar Bingham. And also a reminder that there's a PWI seminar on the 6th of May here in London on water management in the railways for those that are interested in trying for a seminar for CPD. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And we usually adjourn to the grapes. So follow Mike Barlow, because he's always close down. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Good.
Please remember to log off. Otherwise, Sarah will come up.
Let's do this. How do I do this?